All right, welcome back everybody. Today we are going to do a little bit of review of some algebraic principles that you've learned in the last couple of years, and we're going to expand upon them as we add a little bit more complexity to our questions. So I'm going to lead you through going from what you already are very familiar with to adding in those extra little add-ons and showing you the options for how you want to or may want to approach those kinds of questions. So again, what I suggest you do is you pause and copy down what I've written here, or just follow along with me and then try the practice questions yourself by pausing again the video and then checking your solution against mine to ensure that you've actually understood what we've just gone over. So I'm going to be going over adding, subtracting, and multiplying polynomials, which is basically the foundation of algebra here. And before we get to the multiplying, I'm going to go over a little bit of adding and subtracting, just to make sure that you don't confuse the different processes. So section 1, adding and subtracting polynomials. The main thing that you need to remember is that you need to have what are called like terms in order to combine and simplify polynomial expressions. So to combine, what that always refers to is adding and subtracting. So you need to understand what are like terms, because you need to be able to identify whether you have them or not in order to know whether you can proceed to simplify the question further. So like terms basically means that you have terms that have the same variable, and remember variable just means letters and letter combinations. So the same variable combinations if there's more than one, and the same exponents on those variables. So they have to match in every way possible when it comes to the variable section. The coefficients can be different, and you're going to see that down here. I did a chart here that shows you yes examples and no examples. So these ones over here are considered like terms. These ones over here would not be like terms. So meaning in this row, 2x, negative 4x, and 1x, remember there's a 1 there if you don't see the coefficient, just because the number in front is different, that's not what we care about right now, because that just tells you how many of those things you have. So here we have 2x's. Here we have negative 4x's. Here we have 1x. We're all referring to the same thing. We're all talking about apples here. So apples goes with apples goes with apples. So they all match, which means we can add them, we can subtract them, we can combine them. Over here, negative 2x and negative 2x squared do not go together. Even though the negatives 2 match, and they both have x's as the variable, this x is to the power of 1, and this x is squared, so to the power of 2. Therefore, you cannot combine them through adding and subtracting. Back to the S column. Here we have xy, so 1xy, 10yx, and negative xy. Now I threw this in here to show you that xy is the same as yx. We like to write combinations of variables alphabetically. So usually you will see it as the x before the y. However, just in case you happen to see a y before the x, you have to recognize that they're talking about the same thing. Here you have 1xy, here you have 10xy's, and here you have negative 1xy's. So these are all considered like terms, and therefore they go together. Whereas over here you have x squared y and xy squareds. So 6 of them and 10 of them. Yes, there's x's and y's, and yes, they're squared on something. Here the x, though, is squared, and here the y is squared. So because the same exponent is not there on the same variable, then you cannot combine those. Over here we have 7a3b4c, negative 5a3b4c. Again, doesn't matter on the string of variables. 7 versus negative 5 doesn't matter. Those are the coefficients, the numerical coefficients. These are still considered like terms, and you can add and subtract them. Here you have 9, which is just a constant. Notice there's no variable. And 9a. Obviously, we're missing the a variable over here in order to make them match. So these would not be combinable through adding and subtracting. So let's practice a little bit. So adding and subtracting, what we have here is a string of terms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 terms right here. We're going to simplify by collecting those that go together and writing it as a total of that particular item. So 7x's is the first thing that we see. We might as well go with what we see first. 7x's can only go with other x's. So 4y's, no. -3, no. 10y, no. -y, no. +5, no. There's no other term here with an x. So if he can't go with anybody, then that's how many of those things you have. You're still stuck with 7x's. Now let's move to the y's. So here we have +4y's. Now, -3 doesn't have a y, but here's some y's. We've got 10 of them, and here's some more y's. We have -1 of them. So 4 + 10, 14 - 1 is 13. So we have +13 y's in total. Now, it doesn't change all of a sudden to y squared, because that's not what we were collecting. We were collecting y's. So 4 apples plus 10 apples minus 1 apple is 13 apples. Right? So all we're doing is saying how many in total of those things do we have. The last thing we're combining here, or what we haven't talked about so far, are what we refer to as constants. Numbers that don't have a variable attached to them. So they're just numbers. -3 + 5 or 5 - 3 means we're left with 2 overall. And we tend to like to put the constant at the back. Now it doesn't always have to sit at the end, but that's typically where you'll find it. Take another look at your final statement to make sure that nobody else can go with anybody else, that you didn't miss anything. So here are some x's, here's some y's, and there's a constant. Those are all different or unlike terms, therefore they stay separate. So you are done. You've simplified as far as you can go. Over here in the last example in this section, we have 3a minus 5b plus c minus all of this stuff. Now you notice the bracket. I wanted to show you again to pay close attention to when you have a minus sign followed by a bracket. It's technically a -1 that needs to now distribute to everybody that follows him in that bracket. So what does that mean? Well, A's and B's and C's don't go together. So I'm just going to copy those down right now and deal with them later. In order for me to have access to these B's, these A's, and these C's, I need to remove the bracket. And the way I remove the bracket, right, before you add and subtract is multiply. So we multiply first by the -1 that's sitting in front. He's going to travel first to multiply with the 4b to give us -4b. Then he's also going to travel and multiply with the 9a. So a negative times a positive is a negative. They are different signs, so you're left with a negative. And the -1 is going to travel to the guy in the back, the -1c. And a negative times a negative, they are the same sign, so you're left with a positive. 1 times 1 is 1, so you can put the 1 if you want, or you can leave out the 1 and just call it c. Now you'll notice that there's no brackets holding anybody back. A's go with A's, B's go with B's, and C's go with C's. So now we're free to collect like terms. So again, might as well go with what you see in the front. You see 3a. He goes with -9a. 3 minus 9 is -6 of those things. Now it doesn't become a squared. Remember, it's just a's that we were grouping together. So equal sign, remember, goes underneath the previous equal sign. Don't put another one on the same line. Here we have -5b's. We minus 4b's. In total, that's -9b's. So a's are gone, b's are gone. I'm left with positive c, positive another c. That's a positive 2c. 1c plus 1c is 2c's. And that's it. A's, b's, and c's stay separate from each other, separated by pluses and minus signs. So again, we're left with 3 terms in our final answer. Each of these little packages, each of those little sections is considered a term on its own. So that's adding and subtracting, where you must have like terms in order to do so. Just be careful of negative signs in front of brackets. All right, so that leads us now into multiplying out terms. So we're going to do this in sections. However, the overall pattern doesn't change no matter how complex it starts to look. So when you're multiplying, unlike when you're adding and subtracting like before, you do not need to have like terms. Really, all you're doing is going in order, signs times signs, numbers times numbers, so the coefficient times the other coefficient, and the variable times the other variable. The variables do not need to match. Now, if the variables are the same, so an x times an x or a y times a y, the exponents now will be added together in order to come up with your final exponent on that letter in the end. So you add exponents on the same variables, the same letters. So again, the order is always signs, numbers, letters whenever you're multiplying. So a monomial times a monomial. So if you want to remember, a monomial is a single term. Negative 6a is a monomial. Negative 4xy squared, monomial. It's a complete package, number and letters up against each other. Okay, so we have a monomial times a monomial. The order says signs first. A negative times a positive. So a negative times a positive is a negative. Sign is figured out. Now we move on to the number. So the coefficient. 4 times 10. So not 4 plus 10, but 4 times 10 is 40. That's figured out now. Now we move on to the letters. So variable times variable. xy squared times x squared yz. So let's do it in pieces. X times another x squared. So I'm going to have x to the power of 1 plus 2 because they match. We add those exponents. 1 here plus 2 there gives me a total of x cubed, x to the power of 3. Y squared is also matching up here with a y to give me a total of y to the power of 3 as well. So 2 plus the 1 over here. Remember, when you don't see an exponent, you know automatically it's a 1. Now there aren't any z's over here, and there's a z back here. So this guy doesn't have anybody to add in with. So we just copy him down. So don't forget to write the z in your final answer. You bring him down in the end. You don't put a plus sign because he's still being multiplied in with everybody else. All right, so you end up with one final term in your final answer, and you're done there. So that's a monomial times a monomial. One term times one term. Now, it really doesn't matter if it's a monomial, one term times two terms. All that you have to make sure you do is you use your distributive property to make sure that everybody meets up with everybody else. So in this case, the negative 4a is outside the 3a minus b bracket. The negative 4a travels together. It's one package. That's monomial. And he's going to meet up with the 3a first and eventually then with the negative b. So he's going to have to meet up with both of those terms, but we do them one at a time. So equal sign, next line down. Signs, numbers, letters, again in that order. Negative times positive is negative. 4 times 3, 12. Now letters. A times a is a to the power of 2, or better known as a squared. So these two, guy in the front and the guy first in the bracket, they're done. We finished with them. But the negative 4a now has to meet up with the minus 1b in the back. Repeat again the process, the signs. A negative times a negative is a positive. A 4 times a 1 is a 4, and an a times a b, those are different things, so they just sit side by side, ab. A times b is ab, x times y is xy. So they just sit up against each other, just like that. That means multiplication. Check this answer to make sure that you don't happen to have like terms that can be further combined through adding and subtracting. So here we have a squareds, here we have ab's. They're not like each other, so they stay separate like that. So don't put this together for negative 8, for instance, a cubed b's. That wouldn't make any sense because they don't go together. All right, so it's the same process even if the question gets a little bit longer. So again, you always ask yourself, who is directly in front of that bracket? In front of the x plus 1 bracket, we have a 2x. So the 2x needs to travel to both guys in that bracket, so both terms, the x and the plus 1. In front of the last bracket over here, the 6x squared minus 10x, I have a negative 1. So just like you saw before, the -1 has to distribute to travel and release the 6x squared and the 10x from that bracket. So equal sign, next line down. Start, signs, numbers, letters. Signs, positive, number, 2, letter, x squared. So positive 2x squared. Repeat. Signs, positive, number, 2. Now this x traveling doesn't meet up with another x, so he just comes along for the ride. So positive 2x. So this guy is done. He's met with both of these guys. They're finished. Move on now to the last bracket. -1 times positive 6 is -6. Copy down x squared. -1 times -10. Negative times negative is positive. Signs, numbers. 1 times 10 is 10. No letters, but there was an x back here, so don't forget to copy him down. Again, always take a look at your final expanded answer. Now, no brackets there holding anybody back. Can anybody go with anybody else through adding and subtracting? Well, the answer is yes if you see like terms. I happen to see some x squareds. Here I have 2 of them. Here I subtract 6 of them of the same thing. We're talking about the same items over here. So 2 minus 6 is -4 of those things. So again, it stays x squared. It doesn't all of a sudden become x to the power of 4. So we're done with those guys. They have now combined to give us a total of -4 of those things. 2x plus 10x. That's a total of 12 of those things, 12 x's. And you take one look, these are not like terms. You do not get 8x or 8x squared here. So you are finished. You cannot simplify that anymore. So that was now seeing one term times one term and one term times 2 terms, even if it's an extended question with something in the back. So now it shouldn't surprise you that when we actually go a little bit more further in depth, we can now do 2 terms times 2 terms. So instead of having one guy in the front, we're now going to have 2 guys meeting up with 2 guys. And they're always contained in their own little house or their own little bracket. So better known as a binomial times a binomial. So bi means 2. And again, we're still going to use our distributive property, but it's a very particular version of the distributive property known as FOIL, or the acronym FOIL, where each of these letters stands for what you were supposed to do in order to ensure that everybody has a chance to meet up with everybody else. So in the end, you should end up with 4 interactions, right? 4 pairings. So it's not just the first guy times the first guy and the last guy times the last guy. That is incorrect. We have to make sure that everybody has a chance to shake hands with everybody else. So that's why this FOIL acronym, F-O-I-L, is really helpful. So the F means first with first. So here I have A plus B in one bracket and C minus D in the other bracket. Notice it's a bracket up against a bracket, so I know I'm multiplying. The F for first means the A is going to travel and he's going to multiply with the C. So I put a 1 on that arrow there to show you that that's what the F means, first. So A times C is AC. Now, since he's already over there meeting the C, he might as well times with the guy in the back there, which is the D. So that's outside, the 2 outside guys in each bracket. So A times -D is -AD. And again, it's better than writing it as DA. So A comes before D in the alphabet, so -AD. So that means the A now has met with both the C and the D. The A is done. He doesn't need to participate anymore. So now we're going to deal with the 2 inside guys, the B and the C. B times C is just BC. So there's our 2 insides. And then again, the B is not going to ignore the D, so last with last. The last guy in the first bracket goes with the last guy in the second bracket. Negative, remember signs, so negative BD is what you would get. And notice none of these guys go with each other, so we can't add or subtract any of those because they're not like terms. So they stay separate like that on the page. So let's try again over here. Here in the first bracket we have x plus 2. Here in the second bracket we have x minus 1. Equal sign, next line down. And again, if those arcs or drawing those arrows really help your eyes, go ahead and do it. Do them as you need to get the answer. So instead of just drawing 4 arcs all of a sudden, it's just probably easier to just do it as you need them. So x times x, x squared. Now I'm going to say, okay, what do I get when I have my outside meeting each other? Sine negative number 1x. And again, you don't have to write the numerical coefficient of 1. It's understood to be a 1. Now I'm going to do my inside guys. Sine positive number, 2 times 1 is 2, and the letter is x. And then my outsides, last in the first bracket, last in the last bracket. Sine is negative, number is 2, no letters. So we look at our leftovers here. What do we got? We got x squared minus x plus 2x. So it looks like the x terms in the center go together. X squared, 2x minus x is an x, and the negative 2 at the back is just our constant. So you will end up with 4 terms when you expand. Usually the 2 middle ones tend to go together as like terms to give you a trinomial, 3 terms in your final answer. Not always, but usually. So that's your basic FOIL. Very, very important concept you learned last year. Now, that's what you would use in this situation. So you notice here we have a bracket with an x plus 4 inside it with an outside exponent of 2. That means you have 2 of these brackets up against each other. So really it looks like this, but somebody was too lazy and they didn't want to write it out fully because it was just the same thing twice. So really this and this mean the same thing. The x is not squared, the 4 is not squared, the whole bracket is squared because you see the 2 is on the outside of the bracket. So what that means is this is another FOIL question. 2 guys meeting up with 2 guys. So if you were going to approach this the standard regular way is you would have your both brackets. And notice I'm going to show you now 2 ways that you can approach this. So that's why you see 2 arrows here. So the standard way you just saw was you write out both brackets side by side and you do FOIL. First with first gives you x squared. Outside guys gives you 4x. Inside guys gives you 4x. And last with last gives you 16. Clean up the 2 insides because they match, right? Those are like terms. We're not going to keep them separate like that. X squared with a total of 8 x's with a positive 16 at the back. Now, do you see that this took, including the line to actually write it out, 1, 2, 3 lines, right, to finish and get to our final simplified answer? Now, if you see, there's an actual pattern to get to this final answer quicker, basically in 1 step. And what that quick way entails is, I'll show you over here. And again, quick way is optional. I'm just showing it for the people that want to be able to save themselves some work. So the quick way would mean, so for instance, a plus b all squared. We know that we're going to end up with an x squared in the front, and we know that we get that with the first guy times himself, right? First times first gives you guys that. So we know that to get the guy in the front, you got to go a times a. And that's going to give you your a squared. So I'll put that there. So he came from an a times an a. The guy at the back, the 16, that comes from the 4 times the 4. So the last times last. So we know we're going to end up with, in this case, b squared from the b times himself. Remember, the dot means times. So the only trick here is how do we get the middle? How do we get, in this case, 8? How do we get here in this? Well, it wouldn't work in that case. Only in this case because it was the same bracket twice. Where did the 8 x's come from? Well, he came from 4x plus 4x. Well, where did those come from? Well, it came from an x times a 4 and a 4 times an x being added together. Well, do you see that basically that's what we started with? We had an x and we had a 4 in the question. So if I just go 4 times x, I get 4x, And if I just double it, because I know I'm going to end up with 2 of the same thing on the interior, a 4x plus a 4x is an 8x. So over here, to get that middle part, an a times a b, so in our case, a times a b, but I'm going to end up with 2 groupings of that. So I have to multiply that by 2. So what is that going to give us? 2 ABs in this case. And plus and plus. So that's what we get when we expand a plus b all squared the quick way. A squared plus 2ab plus b squared. So this part you see down here is just what you would be doing in your head. So again, let's apply it to this question where we already know the answer. If I asked you to expand and simplify this quickly, knowing that it's the same bracket twice, you would just say, oh, I have to square the first guy with himself, so times him with himself. Then to get the middle, I have to times these 2 parts together. 4 times x or x times 4, it doesn't matter. That's 4x, but you have to remember to double it. 4x times 2 is 8x's, so 4x plus 4x in other words. To get the number at the back, it's just the 4 times himself, so the 4 squared. In other words, 16. So you'll notice you'll get to your final answer in 1 step instead of 3 lines. So it is very useful to know this quick way. And remember, it only works when you have the same bracket twice. You cannot use this quick way when the brackets don't match. When the brackets don't match, you're stuck doing proper FOIL. So you analyze each question. In this case, 2x minus 7, again with a square on it. So the brackets match. So this time, I'm going to do the quick way first, and then I'll do it the regular FOIL way. So the quick way, again, pause and try it yourself, and then come back and see. The quick way would have me go 2x times himself, 2x. So I'm going to get 2x times another 2x is 4x squared. Now to get the middle, I have to go the 2 guys times themselves times 2. So 2x times negative 7, right, because this is a minus sign. That's negative 14 x's when I multiply them together. Negative 14 doubled is negative 28 x's. Negative 14x minus another 14x is negative 28 x's. To get the last part, 7 times 7. And you can put negative with it, but negative times a negative will always be a positive. So that last section is always going to be a plus because any number squared is always positive. 7 times 7, 49 at the back. So that is our final simplified answer from expanding this bracket. Now again, if you didn't want to do that, you would have to use FOIL. So using FOIL, first times first, there's our 4x squared. Outside guys, negative 14x's. Inside guys, negative 14x's. Last with last, positive 49. And then clean up the 2 middles that go together. There's our negative 28x's. So you can see one saved you a little bit of time. Now, where does that come in handy? It comes in handy in questions like over here, where we have 2 separate brackets, okay, multiplied with each other. And then we have a bracket times itself in the back. So this question says 7a minus 4b in one bracket times 2a plus b in the other bracket, added to, so it's important that you recognize that's a plus sign, 5a plus 2b all squared. So there's a square outside the last bracket, which means that bracket is multiplying with himself. So I can apply the quick method to the back part, but I have to do regular FOIL on the front part because those brackets aren't the same thing. So let's get to it. Equal sign, next line down. 7a times 2a. So again, signs, numbers, letters. 14a squared. The outsides, 7 times 1 is 7, ab. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. AB, and again, even though the B is first over here, we like to write it alphabetically. So A times B is AB, negative 8AB. Negative 4 times positive 1 is negative 4B squared. So what happens now is I'm going to personally do the quick way in the back here. You don't have to. You can write the bracket out twice, just like we did here, and do FOIL and collect like terms. You're going to get the same answer in the end. It's just going to take you a little bit of extra time. But doing the quick way back here, and there's a plus sign, so I don't have to worry about distributing a negative later on. 5a times himself. That's 25a squared. Don't write 10. It's not 5 plus 5. It's 5 times 5, a times a. That's 25a squared. 5 times 2 is 10, doubled. So that's positive 20 ab's. And the last guy times himself. 2b times 2b is 4b squareds. So now everything is free and floating around because there's no more brackets. Let's combine all our a squareds together. 14 plus 25 is 39 a squareds. 7ab's minus 8ab's, that would be negative 1 ab's plus 20 of them. So we have 19 ab's. Where are we here? B squareds. Negative 4b squareds, positive 4b squareds. So that means the b squareds cancel each other out. You're left with 0 b squareds. Well, you don't write anything down if you don't have any of them left. So negative 4, positive 4 cancels out. They're all gone. And so that's just to show you that we got to our final answer in 2 lines, and it otherwise would have been very messy and long the other way. So let's move on to this final one in this section. And unfortunately here, this bracket doesn't match this bracket, and these brackets don't match each other. You can't use the quick way here. Unfortunately, you're stuck with doing long expansion, and I want to point out that there's a minus sign in between. So this is the worst case scenario, because now what this question is saying is figure out this answer, and then subtract this back answer from the front answer. So the entire answer back here needs to be subtracted, not just the first section, not just the first term. So what is that going to look like is the following. So regular FOIL. But because of that subtract sign, I'm going to keep everything in the back still in a bracket until after I deal with that minus sign. Over here we had a plus sign. I didn't have to worry about anything in the back. Here it's a different case. So first times first, 12c squared, signs, numbers, letters, positive 4c, negative 12c's, and last with last, negative 4. So that's just the first 2 brackets multiplied with each other. Then there's a minus sign. Now, I'm going to put a bracket, and that's going to house my entire answer from the back section. 5c times c is 5c squared. 5c times 1 is positive 5c. 2 insides, negative 3c's. And last, negative 3. All right, next line down. So another equal sign, next line down. You can, if you want at this point, group like terms together. So these c's can go with these c's and make it even more condensed if you want, or you can save that until the final step to add and subtract. It's really up to you. So 4c's minus 12c, I'm just going to combine that into negative 8c's and minus 4. So now, and again over here, you can combine these right now, or you can do it later. I'm going to do that part later. This negative 1 goes to the 5c squared. This negative 1 goes to the positive 5c to give me negative 5c. Negative 1 times negative 3 is positive 3c. And negative 1 times negative 3 is positive 3. So now that frees up everybody to be added and subtracted with each other, looking for like terms. 12c squared minus 5c squared is 7c squared. Negative 8c minus 5c plus 3c. So it wouldn't have mattered if you had combined these. Negative 5c plus 3c is negative 2c. So we got negative 10c's right here. And we have our constants. Negative 4 plus 3 is still negative 1. So we've now combined and simplified and gotten our final answer. So that was worst case scenario because we weren't able to use the quick way. But again, the only thing that students really have trouble with is knowing what to do with that minus sign. It's not just the 5c squared that is being subtracted. It's everything that came after him that was part of that answer from expanding the second set of brackets. So what does this look like now when you have multiple things now to do in one question? So I'm just calling this section longer or mixed up questions. So what does that mean? Here we have a trinomial, right? 3 things, 3x plus 2y minus 5z. That's 3 terms, all squared. So what this means is you're going to have to write out again the entire bracket twice in this case. And you're going to have to systematically, so same bracket twice. Don't change anything about the brackets. They are exactly the same. First guy goes with first guy goes with middle, first guy goes with last. Middle guy goes with first, middle guy goes with middle guy goes with last. Last guy goes with first, last guy goes with middle, last guy goes with last. So you can see that you're going to end up with a whole chain, a whole string of terms. But as long as you keep it going, you shouldn't have any trouble, signs, numbers, letters, to get each of your individual terms correctly. So first with first with middle, first with last. And again, alphabetical for the letters. Now, 3x in the front, he's done. He's met with everybody. Now, the middle guy of the first bracket. With the first, so that's 6xy. Middle with middle, 4y squared. Middle with last, negative 10yz. Then we have to do the negative 5z. He's going to meet with the first guy, negative 15x before z. Now he's going to meet up with the middle. So notice I'm using my finger to focus my eyes. Negative 5z with 2y is negative 10 yz's instead of zy's. Negative 5 times negative 5, positive 25 z to the power of 2. So I carried it over onto the bottom line here. Equal sign for my final answer. X squareds go with x squareds. Nope, I don't see any others, so he stays in your final answer. XY's go with XY's. Here's 6 of them. Here's 6 more of them. And that's it. So we got 12 XY's. XZ's go with other XZ's. So we have negative 15, negative 15. So that's negative 30 XZ's. So gone, 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 gone. 4y squared. Might as well carry him down. He had nobody to go with. YZ and YZ. Negative 20 YZ's. Gone. I've already dealt with him. Gone. And don't forget positive 25z squared. Okay, so that's our final answer. It's much longer than you would expect, but that's because we had so many terms that had to meet up. Now, another application or way that you would be asked to use this skill is, for instance, in this question where I give you a rectangular prism or a box, and I label the length, the width, and the height with expressions, binomial expressions. So we have 3x plus 1 on this side, x minus 2 on this side, and 4x plus 1 as the height. And I want you to tell me what is the expression for the volume of this prism. So volume, as you know, is length times width times height, right? That formula hasn't changed. So it doesn't matter who you call length, who you call width, and who you call height. So 3x plus 1 times the width, I'm going to call x minus 2 the width, times the height, 4x plus 1. So that would be the factored form version of the volume. However, if I asked you to simplify this, you would now have to expand sectional by section. So first two brackets times each other. Forget about the last bracket until the end. So get your answer from these two times each other, and then take that answer after you FOIL out these brackets and FOIL that answer with the final bracket. And then collect all your like terms in the end. So in the end, you should end up with an x to the power of 3 sitting in the front. So systematically, you do 2 brackets at a time. So that's why I wanted to show you the setup. 2 brackets at a time. Okay, so don't try to do 3x times x times 4x. Don't do that. Okay, so do just those 2. Get your answer from the first 2. It doesn't matter which 2 you use first. And then carry that answer to use the last bracket, just like you saw here. Okay, so that would be your strategy there. Lastly, we're now going to look at, okay, what happens now when we combine these different aspects together? So I'm calling them combination questions, where sometimes it's not only just a bracket times a bracket, or something in front times a bracket. Now it's something in front times a bracket times a bracket. So sometimes you have a monomial in front of a binomial times a binomial. Okay, so sometimes that's what happens in a question. So now you have to make a judgment call. What is it you want to do first? Because again, we only attack 2 things at a time. The third guy is always left till the end. So you can either distribute the first guy into the first bracket you see, not to both brackets. So you distribute the term in front to one of the brackets. And then you get that answer, and then you FOIL that answer with the last bracket you haven't touched yet. That's an option. So what that would look like in this case is A times B, which is AB, and A times C, which is AC. That answer goes now in its own little bracket, and it multiplies through FOIL, through distribution, with D plus E, the bracket we haven't touched yet. So that is one option. Has its pros and it has its cons. The second option is forget about whatever's sitting in front. So I'll just cover it up with my finger here. And just deal with the bracket times the bracket first. So FOIL, bracket times bracket. So B times D, B times E, C times D, C times E. Get that answer. And then distribute whatever's in front to whatever you got from your FOILed answer. So the A is the last thing to actually go and visit everybody. So the order you multiply things in does not matter, but you just have to pick one way that you like doing it and always do it that way, or based on the type of question that you have. So you're going to see here what I mean. I have a couple here that we're going to go over, and maybe one way works better in one question and another way works better in another question. So here we have negative 2 times x minus 3 times a 4x plus 1. So the negative 2 is a monomial, and then we have a binomial times a binomial. So I'm going to show you both ways. So in the first way I'm going to do it, I'm going to treat the negative 2, and he's going to go to the first bracket because he's the first guy I see. I'm going to forget about the 4x plus 1 right now. So I'm going to get negative 2x, and I'm going to get a positive 6. The second bracket, 4x plus 1, is still 4x plus 1. So do not multiply 4x plus 1 times negative 2. The negative 2 is now within this first bracket answer. He's hidden in there. So he's now going to be carried through. So equal sign, next line down. We still have to FOIL bracket times bracket. So first times first is negative 8x squared. The 2 outside guys, negative 2x. The 2 inside guys, positive 24x's. And last with last is 6. And again, always look for like terms in your final answer to see if you can clean this up. Negative 8x squared, what do we got? 22x's, positive 6. So not too bad. Took us 3 lines. Not too much time. Now, some people like that. Some people would rather forget about the -2 right now. So the -2 is just going to float in front. And what we're going to do is we're going to FOIL first. So FOIL first. So in the FOIL first, x times 4x is 4x squared. X times 1 is an x. -3 times 4 is -12x's. And -3 times 1 is -3. And then next line down, the -2 goes to everybody, or you can clean up first. Doesn't really matter. -2, I'll clean up because these are like terms. 1 take away 12, or -12 plus 1 is -11x is -3. So now that I have my nice answer from FOIL, I'm going to take my last line to distribute the -2. So -2 times 4 is -8. -2 times -11 is +22. And -2 times -3 is +6. So I hope you see that you end up in the same place for the same amount of work. All right, so neither one is better than the other in this case, but it is important that you don't make those classic mistakes, for instance, of multiplying the 2 into everybody. Okay, so he goes into the first bracket, or you save him for last, as I did over here. So what does that look like in this type of question? So I'm just going to copy him down over here because I think I'm going to need more room. So we have 5x sitting in front of a 4x minus 1, all squared, bracket, and then a minus sign, 3x with an x plus 1 and an x minus 1. So this is basically as tough as it gets because we have a little bit of everything. We have binomial times a binomial, like we do here. This one allows us to do the quick way because it's the same bracket twice. Here it's just regular FOIL. But then I also have something in front, which I'm either going to have to deal with first or I'm going to have to deal with at the end. Something in front, which I'm going to have to deal with at the beginning or at the end. And lastly, I have a minus sign. So that minus also needs to be distributed. So this is the way that I would suggest that you approach or attack this question. Like I said, pause, try it yourself right now, see how it goes, and then come back and see if you match up with me as far as your method. Okay, so let's see how we're going to do this one. I'm going to try and do it the most efficient way. So I'm going to leave the 5x sitting in front for now. I don't want to deal with them. I'm going to FOIL out 4x minus 1 times himself. I'm going to do the quick way, which is 4x times 4x, 16x squared. 4x times -1 is -4x. So remember, we square that. You times these two together. And you also double it. So 4 times 1 is 4, times 2 is -8x's. And then at the end, -1 times 1. So that's +1 at the end. So that's the quick FOIL answer from 4x minus 1. If you didn't want to do it the quick way, that's perfectly fine. I'll come back later and deal with the 5x. Now I'm going to move to the back set of brackets, and I'm going to leave the -3x just to hang out in the front. Put another bracket. Let's see what I get when I FOIL out these two guys with each other. X squared minus x, positive x, -1. Back to the front again. This 5 is going to go to everybody. This 5x, sorry, is going to go to everybody that comes after. So 5 times 16, I believe, is 80. X times x squared, we add the exponents when the bases match. So that's x to the power of 3, or x cubed. 5 times -8 is -40. X times x is x squared. 5 times 1 is 5. The x just comes along. Now, you can combine these two guys together right now, or you can save that for later, but the 3x traveling with the negative sign is going to go to everybody. So negative times positive is negative. 3 times 1 is 3. X to the power of 3. Negative times positive. Negative times negative is positive. X squared. Negative times positive is negative. X squared. Negative times negative is positive. Sorry there, I know the line got in the way. But what happens is positive 3x squared, negative 3x squared. Well, those guys cancel each other out. They give you 0x squared back there. So I'm not even going to pay attention to that part. Here I have some x cubes. Here I have some x cubes. 80 subtract 3 of the same thing gives me 77 x to the power of 3. So now I'm just collecting like terms. Negative 40x squared plus 3 minus 3 is still negative 40x squared. Positive 5x's, positive 3x's gives me positive 8x's. And again, we like to write our answers going in order of degree. So highest degree, which means highest exponent, down to the lowest exponent. That's typically, again, the way that you'll see your answer. Okay, so I tried to show it to you the most efficient way possible. So you wouldn't have to utilize extra lines, foiling first, then collecting like terms, then distributing. But there's nothing wrong with it. If you did it that way, it would just have taken you extra lines in order to get to your final answer. So I hope that helps and it brings back a lot of the algebra that you've done in the last couple of years. And please do the practice because that'll help you, again, just become more automatic with it so you know exactly what steps you want to do in the order that you want to do it in. All right. Let me know if you have any questions. Bye-bye.